She threw me out the day after my son's funeral. Not a week, not even 3 days of grace, just 24 hours after I laid my only child to rest. That's when Stephanie looked me dead in the eye and said, "This house is mine now. You'll need to pack and leave." Before we dive into family betrayal stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. Imagine that moment. You've just buried the boy you carried for 9 months, the man you raised through scraped knees, graduations, and heartbreaks. Your arms are still heavy with grief, your voice still raw from eulogizing him. And instead of comfort, you're met with eviction papers spoken in cold, clipped words. I stood there stunned. For 2 years, I had lived under that roof ever since I sold my own home and gave David and Stephanie $40,000 to help with their down payment. It was supposed to be temporary, a bridge, until I found something smaller, more manageable. But like most bridges, it became the path we all walked daily, me cooking dinners, folding laundry, helping where I could. I thought I was part of the household, part of the family. Turns out I was just a complication. The cruelty wasn't in the words alone, but in the timing. A widow, now a mother without her son, sent into the night with 4 suitcases and a stack of memories nobody wanted. Stephanie didn't even raise her voice. She didn't need to. She delivered the verdict like a banker closing an account, polite, efficient, final. I packed in silence, every folded blouse feeling like a betrayal. When David was alive, he always told me, "Mom, don't worry. I've got you." I believed him. He had a kind of steady calm that made people trust he would keep his word. But as I zipped up the last bag, staring at the room stripped bare of my photographs, I wondered if even he had underestimated the woman he married. The driveway was quiet that evening. Stephanie crossed her arms and watched as I hauled box after box into my aging sedan. Not once did she offer to help. Not once did she say, "Take your time." At the 3rd trip, I looked at her and whispered, "David would be horrified." She didn't flinch. "David is dead," she said flatly. "And the sooner you accept that, the better." Those words cut deeper than any knife. Not because they were true, death is undeniable, but because they revealed her heart. My son's absence wasn't a loss to her, it was an opportunity. I drove away that night to a budget motel off Route 9. The neon sign buzzed like a cruel joke. The room smelled of bleach and broken promises, the polyester bedspread scratchy against my fingers. I set down my bags and stared into the cracked mirror above the dresser. Who was this woman staring back at me? A widow, a mother robbed of her son, a tenant discarded from the very house she helped secure. It would have been easy to sink into despair. At 67, starting over feels like climbing a mountain barefoot. But somewhere between grief and exhaustion, another feeling flickered to life, something sharper, steadier. Stephanie thought she had won. She thought by shoving me into the cold, she had erased me from the story. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that David had always been more observant than he let on. He saw things. He prepared. That night, as I lay awake listening to the hum of the motel air conditioner, I whispered to myself, "The best revenge isn't shouting back. The best revenge is letting people reveal who they really are." And Stephanie had just revealed everything. Have you ever faced a family betrayal that left you standing in the cold, wondering where to go next? Comment below where you're watching from. Stories like these remind us we're never as alone as they make us feel. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. Grief has a way of replaying itself in cruel loops. Lying on that stiff motel bed, I kept hearing the sound of my phone ringing in the dark. It was Tuesday, 3:17 a.m. I didn't need to look at the screen. A mother always knows her child's voice. "Mom." David gasped, his voice raw, broken. "Something's wrong. My chest. I can't." And then silence. By the time I reached the hospital, my son was gone. 45 years old, strong and vibrant, taken by a massive heart attack that felt as sudden as a lightning strike. The doctor explained it clinically, like reciting weather patterns, arteries blockage, nothing we could do. But I couldn't hear the science. All I heard was absence. Stephanie stood beside me in that sterile waiting room. Her face was the picture of shock lips, trembling eyes wide. To anyone else, she looked like a grieving widow. But I noticed something beneath the performance, a flicker that didn't belong in grief. Relief. Freedom. I wanted to believe I imagined it, that my pain was twisting my perception. Still, the image stayed with me like a splinter. "What happens now?" I whispered, clutching the edge of a plastic chair like it could anchor me. Stephanie straightened her spine, her mascara barely smudged. "Now we deal with reality. David's gone. I have decisions to make. Not we, not family. Decisions." That was the first crack in the mask. The funeral consumed the next 3 days. I offered to pay for the arrangements. My boy deserved nothing less. But Stephanie waved me off. "I'm his wife. I know what he would have wanted." She said it like a refrain, as if repeating the words gave her ownership of his memory. I buried myself in writing the eulogy, calling relatives, trying to steady my shaking hands. At 67, I'd already buried my parents, my husband, and too many friends. But burying a child, that is a grief no parent should know. The service itself was beautiful, I'll give her that. White lilies lined the aisle, the choir sang David's favorite hymn, and every guest murmured about the elegant arrangements. Stephanie floated through the crowd like a queen in mourning, receiving condolences with a nod, a tear dabbed just so. She even thanked the caterer. But beauty can't cover cruelty. I was standing in the receiving line when I heard her voice drift from behind a wall of flower arrangements. She was talking to her sister, her tone hushed but sharp. "The life insurance alone will cover the mortgage for 2 years," she said, "and without the extra expenses, I'll be just fine." My stomach twisted. "Extra expenses?" Her sister asked quietly. "What about Eleanor? Where will she go?" Stephanie's laugh was brittle as broken glass. "That's not my problem anymore. She can figure it out like any other adult." In that moment, the truth hit me harder than any eviction notice. I had been living under their roof for 2 years, ever since I sold my own house to help them. I cooked meals, paid bills, folded laundry, and still to her I was nothing more than an extra expense. That night I sat alone in David's childhood bedroom, the one Stephanie had turned into a guest room. On the dresser were photographs, his college graduation, their wedding, him holding his nephew at Christmas. But not one picture of David and me from recent years. They'd been removed, erased. When had that happened? A knock came at the door. Stephanie leaned against the frame, her black dress perfectly pressed, not a hair out of place. Gone was the mask of grief. Her eyes gleamed with calculation. "We need to talk, Eleanor," she said. The next day, the cruelty sharpened into steel. After the reception, Stephanie pulled me into the kitchen and closed the door. "This house is in David's name, which means it's mine now. I need privacy. You being here, it's not working anymore." I tried to keep my voice steady, though my hands shook. "Stephanie, I understand you're grieving, but surely—" "No." She cut me off, her tone brisk as a banker refusing a loan. "I've made my decision. You have until tomorrow evening to pack." Tomorrow. 67 years of life reduced to a 24-hour deadline. When I carried my last suitcase down the stairs, Stephanie stood at the door like a guard. "Time's up, Eleanor." I asked her one question, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Do you know if there will be a reading of David's will? Did he leave anything?" She tilted her head, genuinely puzzled. "Why would he—" "You're not his wife. You never contributed to this household." The irony of those words nearly made me laugh. My $40,000 down payment must have slipped her memory. Or maybe she had convinced herself it was a gift. I drove away without looking back. The motel welcomed me with the same buzzing neon, the same smell of bleach. But something was different this time. Beneath the grief, beneath the humiliation, there was a spark I couldn't ignore. Stephanie thought she had ended me. She thought she had erased me, like the photographs from that dresser. But what she didn't know was that David had been far more meticulous than she ever gave him credit for. I didn't know it yet, but soon a sealed envelope would appear. Soon a lawyer would utter the words, "Your presence is required." And Stephanie would learn that sometimes the cruelest thing you can call someone an extra expense is the very reason justice finds its way back around. The motel room was quiet, except for the rattle of the air conditioner and the hum of trucks on Route 9. I'd been there a week already. 7 nights of staring at beige walls, 7 mornings of drinking bitter coffee from styrofoam cups. Grief is supposed to come in waves, but mine came in ledgers. Each day I calculated how long my savings would last. 1 week at the motel cost more than my old mortgage payment. My Social Security check wasn't due for 2 more weeks, and my pension barely covered groceries, let alone rent in this town. I started searching online for senior apartment studio rentals, anywhere that didn't smell of disinfectant and despair. I'd never thought of myself as homeless, but sitting on that polyester bedspread with 4 suitcases stacked against the wall, that's exactly what I was. A woman stripped of her home, her family, and if Stephanie had her way, her dignity. Still, I forced myself into small routines. Morning walks around the parking lot. Evening phone calls with my sister in Phoenix, who begged me to fly out and stay with her. But pride is a strange thing. I wasn't ready to run. This was my town, my life. Why should I be the one to disappear? On the 7th morning, just as I was folding laundry on the motel bed, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, local, but formal. I almost didn't answer. Mrs. Fairfield. The voice was calm, professional. This is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates. I handled your son David's legal affairs. I sat down hard on the bed. Yes, I remember you from the house closing. I'm calling to inform you that the probate process has begun. There will be a formal reading of David's will next Tuesday at 2 o'clock in my office. Your presence is required. I blinked. My presence? Surely he meant Stephanie. She was the wife, the heir. Yes, ma'am. You are specifically named as a beneficiary. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Beneficiary. It sounded like a word from another world, a world where I wasn't just an extra expense. I think there must be some confusion, I stammered. Stephanie said I can only tell you what's written in the will, Mr. Morrison interrupted gently, and it very clearly names you. Please bring a photo ID and arrive promptly at 2. We'll see you then. When he hung up, I just sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. David had left me something. My boy had thought of me even in his final months. I didn't let myself dream big. Maybe it was his father's watch or our family photo albums. A keepsake. Something sentimental. But even that was enough. Proof that I hadn't been erased completely, that Stephanie couldn't scrub me from his memory. The next few days stretched like taffy. I tried to keep busy. I scrolled through apartment listings, penciled numbers into a notepad, calculated deposits and monthly costs. My savings could cover 1 more week at the motel, maybe 2 if I skipped meals. After that, I wasn't sure. At night, I replayed Stephanie's words. You never contributed. You're not his wife. Each sentence landed like a hammer, flattening years of sacrifice. But then I remembered Mr. Morrison's voice. Your presence is required. And I clung to those words like a lifeline. On Sunday morning, I drove past the old house. Stephanie's silver BMW was in the driveway, her curtains drawn tight. I didn't stop. I just looked once, then kept driving. That was her fortress now. But somewhere inside a law office downtown, a sealed envelope waited. And that envelope had my name on it. The day of the reading arrived gray and drizzly. I dressed carefully, navy skirt, pressed blouse, the same outfit I'd worn to David's graduation. My hands trembled as I buttoned it, but I wanted to look steady. Dignity is sometimes all a woman has left. At 1:45, I sat in the parking lot of Morrison & Associates, gripping the steering wheel. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then a silver BMW pulled in beside me. Stephanie stepped out in a sleek black dress, every inch the wealthy widow. A man in an expensive suit followed her brother Marcus. When Stephanie saw me, her face darkened. She marched into the office and demanded of the receptionist, "What is she doing here? Mrs. Fairfield is here for the will reading," the young woman replied politely. "Which Mrs. Fairfield?" Stephanie snapped. "Both of you, apparently." I took a seat on the opposite side of the waiting room. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the rustle of Marcus's legal pad. My palms were sweaty, my throat dry. I whispered a prayer David used to say before exams, "Lord, let the truth stand taller than lies." At exactly 2 o'clock, Mr. Morrison appeared in the doorway. He was silver-haired, kind-eyed, with the steady calm of a man who had guided many families through storms. "Ladies, gentlemen," he said, ushering us into his mahogany office, "I know this is a difficult time." But David was very specific about his wishes. "I will read his will in full, and then we will address any questions." Stephanie sat forward, hands clasped, ready to collect her winnings. Marcus clicked his pen, prepared to note every detail. And me. I simply folded my hands and waited, praying that whatever was in that sealed envelope carried more than money, praying it carried justice. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. The air inside Mr. Morrison's office was thick with polish and silence. Bookshelves lined the walls, leather-bound volumes stacked neatly like soldiers. A heavy mahogany desk sat between us and the truth. Stephanie perched on the edge of her chair, posture, perfect lips painted the same crimson as her nails. She looked like a woman about to collect a prize. Marcus, her brother, leaned beside her with a legal pad, open pen, ready to jot down numbers. I sat across from them, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Mr. Morrison adjusted his glasses, his expression neutral. "Ladies, this is never an easy moment, but David was very specific in his instructions, and it's my duty to honor them exactly." Stephanie nodded with exaggerated solemnity, as though she herself were guiding the proceedings. The first items of the will were predictable. "To my wife, Stephanie Fairfield, I leave the marital residence, the vehicles, my retirement accounts, and the proceeds of my life insurance policy." Stephanie smiled, glancing sideways at me with a look that said, "See, this is mine." Marcus scribbled rapidly, circling figures, underlining totals. Mr. Morrison continued. "Additionally, Stephanie inherits all personal belongings within the residence, with the exception of those specifically listed otherwise." I sat still, swallowing the ache in my throat. So far, everything went to her. It was what I had expected. Then Mr. Morrison cleared his throat, and his voice shifted slightly. "There is, however, one final provision." The room changed. Stephanie's smile faltered. Her back stiffened. Marcus set down his pen. I felt my heart begin to pound. "This provision was added 3 months ago on February 15th, Mr. Morrison explained. "To my mother, Eleanor Fairfield. I leave the contents of Safe Deposit Box 3537 at First National Bank, along with all associated account documentation contained therein." For a moment, the room was silent enough to hear the clock ticking on the wall. Stephanie broke it first. "What safe deposit box? David never mentioned anything like that." Mr. Morrison lifted a folder from his desk. Apparently it was something he maintained privately. He was very clear about its purpose, and I witnessed the amendment myself. "Eleanor, these are the documents you'll need, along with his personal key." He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. My hand trembled as I reached for it. Stephanie's voice sharpened. "If there's anything of value in that box, it should be part of the estate. I demand it be included." Mr. Morrison looked at her calmly. "You're free to file a challenge, but the provision is clear. The safe deposit box is a separate asset designated solely to his mother. David was competent when he made this change, and I notarized it personally." Stephanie's face flushed crimson. "This is outrageous. He wouldn't have kept something from me. Perhaps he wanted to make sure his mother was provided for," Mr. Morrison said gently. Marcus leaned forward. "What's in the box?" "Investments, cash, jewelry." "I don't know," Mr. Morrison replied. "David left no inventory, only instructions. Eleanor, you are to access it privately with the bank manager. No one else is authorized." I felt every eye in the room on me. The envelope in my hand suddenly weighed as much as stone. Stephanie stood abruptly. "Marcus, we're leaving. We'll contest this tomorrow." "Before you do," Mr. Morrison added, pulling another slip of paper from the folder, "there are instructions from David for his mother. Eleanor, he wanted you to access the box within a few days and review its contents in private. The bank will need his death certificate and this key." Stephanie practically lunged across the desk. "I'll be coming with her." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Mr. Morrison said, his tone still polite but firm. "Bank policy allows only the named holder to access the box. Eleanor alone. This is insane," Stephanie sputtered. "For all we know, it's just junk." I stood slowly, sliding the envelope into my purse. "Then I suppose I'll find out." As we walked back into the waiting room, I could feel Stephanie's eyes boring into me like daggers. Outside in the parking lot, she cornered me beside my car. "Eleanor, let's be reasonable," she said, her voice low, urgent. "Whatever's in that box, David would want us to share it. Family should stick together." I looked at her, remembering the words she'd hissed behind the funeral flowers. "Extra expenses." "You made it very clear," I said quietly, "that you don't believe David would leave me anything. Now suddenly you're worried about sharing interesting timing." Her mask slipped then, just for a second. Cold calculation flickered in her eyes. "Don't forget you're homeless. You need me more than I need you." I paused, hand on my car door. "Actually, Stephanie, I don't think I need anything from you at all." That night, back at the motel, I placed the sealed envelope on the bedspread and just stared at it. My fingers itched to tear it open to know what secrets David had left for me. But I remembered his voice in that last call, strained but still protective. "Mom, don't rush. Be careful." I decided to wait, to do this the right way. 3 business days later, I would walk through the security doors of First National Bank, envelope in hand, heart racing. And what I found inside that box would change everything. 3 days later, I stood inside the cold marble lobby of First National Bank. The security doors clicked shut behind me with a finality that made my heart stutter. A woman in a navy suit. Mrs. Peterson, the branch manager, met me at the counter. "Mrs. Fairfield," she said softly, "we've been expecting you. Please accept my condolences for your loss." Her words were kind, but her eyes flickered with curiosity. She already knew this was no ordinary errand. She guided me down a long corridor through 2 locked doors until we stood in front of a steel vault that smelled faintly of oil and thyme. Box 3537. David's box. Mrs. Peterson inserted her master key. My hands shook as I slid David's key into the second slot. The lock clicked, and the drawer glided out with surprising weight. It was larger than I expected, about the size of a briefcase, heavy enough that my arms trembled as I carried it to the private viewing room. "Take all the time you need," Mrs. Peterson said, closing the door behind me. For a long moment, I just stared at the box, my pulse hammering. Then I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was an envelope with my name written in David's familiar handwriting. I pressed it to my chest, tears filling my eyes. Even from the grave, my son's voice had found me. With shaking hands, I unfolded the letter. "Mom," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone." And by now, Stephanie has probably shown you who she really is. I'm sorry for that, but not surprised. I've known for years what kind of person I married, and I've been preparing for this moment. I sank into the chair, my vision blurring as I continued. "You gave us $40,000 for our down payment. You always called it a loan even though you never asked for repayment." I never forgot. For the last 5 years, I've been investing that money, adding to it whenever I could. What's in this box isn't just repayment, it's what careful investing has grown into. Enough to make sure you'll never depend on anyone's charity again. My breath caught as I pulled out the next folder. Inside were account statements, brokerage portfolios, certificates of deposit. The numbers swam before my eyes, balances, dividends, growth charts. One account read $4.7 million, another $8.3 million. Several more scattered across banks and funds, all titled in my name. I added them in my head, disbelieving. The total crossed $25 million. $25 million. I pressed my palm to my mouth, a sob breaking free. My boy hadn't just remembered me. He had secured me. And then came the part of the letter that chilled me. "I also want you to know the truth about what's been happening. For years, Stephanie told people you contributed nothing. But every month, the mortgage was paid automatically from my salary account. Every dollar you gave went into these investments. And I documented everything, emails, texts, even photos of credit card bills. I wanted you to have proof, not just memories. It's all here in the folder labeled Documentation." I reached into the box and pulled out a thick binder. Inside were printed screenshots of text messages, email chains, even scanned receipts. One text from Stephanie to her sister read, "I can't wait until the old bat finally moves out. Then we'll turn her room into my yoga studio." Another showed her writing to Marcus convincing David that she should contribute more is easy. He's too soft to see the truth. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page. Each document was a blade cutting through the polite fictions I had endured for years. Stephanie hadn't just resented me, she had plotted against me, shaping lies into truths, until even David must have questioned my worth. But my son had seen. He had gathered it all quietly, methodically. Not for revenge, but for protection. The final paragraph of his letter nearly undid me. Mom, don't confront Stephanie until you are safe. Don't let her charm or cruelty pull you back in. Take this money, take the documentation, and build a life where no one can make you feel unwanted again. That's my last gift to you. I love you. I clutched the letter, sobbing into the quiet room. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the love, the foresight, the fact that even in his last months, David was still my protector. When I finally emerged, Mrs. Peterson helped me place the documents in a secure envelope. She explained the process for transferring the funds into accounts I could access. I nodded numbly, clutching the papers like lifelines. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Lunch tomorrow. We should talk about what you found in that box. Stephanie. I stared at the screen, my tears drying into something harder. My son had been right, she already knew. I typed back 2 words. Noon works. It was time to show Stephanie that sometimes the people you treat like extra expenses are the ones holding the receipts. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. The next day at noon sharp, I walked up the front steps of the house that had once felt like mine. Stephanie opened the door before I could knock, dressed in a flowing white dress that probably cost more than my motel bill for the week. Her smile was wide, her tone honeyed. Eleanor, she purred. I'm so glad you came. I made your favorite chicken salad. I nearly laughed. For 2 years, she'd never once remembered what I liked. But now that she suspected there was money involved, suddenly I was worthy of fine china and fresh flowers. The dining room table was laid out like a magazine spread, crystal glasses, wedding china, a bouquet of lilies. It was all performance, of course. Stephanie thrived on appearances. We sat and she poured iced tea as if nothing had happened between us. I've been thinking a lot. She began, her voice dripping with sweetness. David would want us to support each other. Family should stick together. Family. The word tasted bitter. Just days ago, she'd called me an extra expense. Now I was family. I lifted my glass and sipped slowly. I couldn't agree more, I said evenly. Her eyes lit up. She thought she had me. I'm so relieved to hear you say that. I was worried you might still be upset about the timing. The timing, I asked, setting my glass down. You know, she said with a practiced sigh, asking you to leave so soon after the funeral. I was grieving. I wasn't myself. I tilted my head. You seemed very much yourself, Stephanie. Her smile flickered, but didn't fade. She leaned closer. What matters is moving forward. So about what David left you, I think we should pool our resources. Combine whatever was in that safe deposit box with his life insurance and retirement accounts. Invest it together. I have excellent financial advisors. I almost choked on my tea. She really thought she could spin this. That's very thoughtful, I said. But what makes you think there was anything valuable in that box? She faltered just for a second. Well, David was private about finances. He must have had a reason to keep something separate. Private, I repeated. Interesting choice of words. Her eyes narrowed. What was in the box, Eleanor? I smiled, reaching into the gift bag I'd brought. Before we get into that, I brought you something. She unwrapped it eagerly, revealing a framed photo of David from his college graduation. For the first time that afternoon, her face softened. Oh, this is lovely. I thought you should have it, I said. After all, you were such a devoted wife. The emphasis wasn't lost on her. Her eyes snapped up, searching mine. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing at all, I said, sipping tea again. Her facade slipped. Just tell me what was in that box. I set down my glass. Documents. Interesting reading material. Her face paled. What kind of documents? Oh, you know. Financial statements, investment records, some correspondence. I let the word hang. Quite a few printed emails and text messages. The color drained from her face completely. Text messages, she whispered. David was thorough, I said softly. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a screenshot. Would you like to see one? This is you telling your sister, I can't wait until the old bat moves out so I can turn her room into a home gym. Stephanie lunged for my phone, but I pulled it back smoothly. There are dozens more, I said conversationally. David kept everything. Emails, texts, credit card statements, a full archive. Her hands trembled. He had no right. Actually, he had every right. It was his house, his finances, his mother, and he knew someday you'd show your true colors. She sank back in her chair, the mask gone now. What do you want from me, Eleanor? An apology. Money. What? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. I don't want your money. I never did. And as for an apology, your actions already speak louder than any words. She tried one last time. We could still work together. If David left you a significant amount, it's only fair to share it. I'm his wife. You are, I agreed. And that's why you already received the house, the cars, the insurance, the retirement funds. Quite a generous inheritance. Her eyes flashed. And you're just his mother. The words should have broken me. Instead, they crystallized into clarity. Yes, I said quietly, just his mother. The woman who raised him supported him and loaned him the money to buy this house. And apparently, that was enough for David to make sure I would never need your approval to exist. Stephanie's hand shook so hard her glass clinked against the table. She knew she had lost control. I stood tucking my purse under my arm. Thank you for lunch. The chicken salad was lovely, but I think we're finished here. She sprang up. Eleanor, wait. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the woman who had once tried to erase me. Her mascara had smudged her hands, clenched at her sides. Sometimes, I said softly, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's justice served when it's needed most. And then I walked out into the sunshine free in a way I hadn't felt in years. The sunshine outside Stephanie's house felt different. Not warm exactly, but steady, like a reminder that light still existed beyond grief and manipulation. I walked down the steps, my heels clicking against the concrete, and breathed deeper than I had in weeks. Back at the motel, I spread David's documents across the small desk, like puzzle pieces. Brokerage statements, bank records, notarized letters, all proof not just of money, but of foresight. My son hadn't left me scraps. He'd built a fortress in paper and ink designed to stand even after his heart gave out. That night I didn't sleep much. Instead, I began sketching a plan. First, secure housing. I couldn't live out of suitcases forever. I needed a place that was mine, not borrowed space in a motel or someone else's spare bedroom. I opened my laptop, bookmarked a handful of modest rentals, and circled a one-bedroom apartment near the library. Hardwood floors, a little balcony, nothing flashy. Affordable even without dipping deep into the trust. Second, transfer the funds. Mrs. Peterson had already explained how to move the investments into my own accounts. The paperwork was tedious, but tedious work is steady work. By the end of the week, the stipend from the trust would start landing in my account monthly, enough to cover rent, groceries, even a few luxuries I hadn't allowed myself in years. Third, boundaries. This one was harder. Money is easy to manage with a ledger. People require firmer lines. Stephanie's lunch invitation had proved she would keep testing, pushing, manipulating. If I didn't set rules now, she would find ways to wriggle back into my life. So I called Mr. Morrison. From now on, I said firmly, all communication with Stephanie goes through you. Phone calls, texts, emails. I don't want direct contact. He hesitated. That's a strong boundary, Eleanor. Are you sure? Yes, I replied. My son gave me the tools to be safe. The least I can do is honor his effort. Mr. Morrison promised to draft a no-contact letter outlining the arrangement. I hung up feeling lighter. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't reacting to Stephanie. I was choosing. 2 days later, I signed the lease for the small apartment near the library. When I opened the door for the first time, I was struck by the silence. Not the heavy silence of mourning, but the clean slate of a space waiting to be filled. I set my suitcases on the hardwood floor and whispered, "We're home." The next morning, I made coffee in a second-hand French press and drank it on the little balcony. Birds chattered in the trees, cars hummed in the distance, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. Each photograph of David went into a simple frame. The letter he'd written me stayed in the top drawer of my nightstand, folded carefully a compass for the days ahead. My sister called that evening. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice warm across the miles. "I'm steady," I said. "Stronger than I thought." She chuckled. "That's the Eleanor I know. Stronger than you let on." Stephanie, of course, didn't take the new boundaries well. Mr. Morrison forwarded me her first email full of sweet apologies, offers to help manage the funds sprinkled with guilt about David's memory. I didn't reply. Her second email arrived 2 days later, colder this time, thinly veiled threats about family obligations and sharing resources. Again, I didn't reply. Finally, she left a voicemail that Morrison transcribed for me. "If you think you can cut me out, you're wrong. David was my husband. Everything he had belongs to me." I read the transcript, folded it, and slid it into the same folder where David's documentation lived. Let her rant. The paper trail would only make my side clearer. Boundaries are like fences. You don't build them to shut out the world, but to protect what's growing inside. And for the first time, something was growing in me again. On Sunday, I visited the small church where David had been baptized. After the service, I lit a candle and whispered, "You did it, son. You kept your word." The flame flickered steady and sure. I didn't need to shout my victory or humiliate Stephanie or parade around with wealth. Justice had been served already. My task now was simpler, harder, and far more important to live. That evening, as I arranged flowers on my new kitchen table, I realized something else. Revenge had never been the point. It was always about restoration, restoring my dignity, my safety, my peace. David had given me the tools, but I had to choose how to use them, and I chose to build a life where no one could call me an extra expense again. Mr. Morrison's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books when I walked in. The same mahogany desk, the same shelves of legal tomes, but this time I wasn't trembling. This time I came on my own terms. Stephanie was already there, sitting stiffly in a navy dress, her brother Marcus by her side. She shot me a look sharp enough to cut glass. I ignored it, setting my purse on the chair beside me. Mr. Morrison folded his hands. "Thank you both for coming. I understand there have been tensions since the will reading." "Tensions?" Stephanie snapped. "She's hiding assets. That box should have been part of the estate." "I have every right to contest." Morrison's expression didn't change. "You are free to contest, but I'll tell you now, David structured everything lawfully. The safe deposit box and the trust funds are separate designated assets. Any challenge would be dismissed." Stephanie's cheeks flushed. "So that's it?" She walks away with a fortune, and I'm left with, I couldn't help myself. With the house, the cars, the insurance, and the retirement accounts, I interrupted softly. "You inherited plenty, Stephanie. More than enough for most people to live comfortably." Her head snapped toward me. Comfortably isn't enough. There it was, the truth she could never hide for long. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. "I suggest we keep this civil. Eleanor, is there anything you'd like to address?" I opened my purse and placed a thin folder on the desk. "Just a few things David wanted me to be clear about." Stephanie's eyes narrowed. "What is that documentation?" I said evenly. "Emails, text messages, bank statements, all from the past 5 years. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Stephanie's knuckles whitened as she gripped the arms of her chair. "You're bluffing," she hissed. I slid one page across the desk, a printout of a text message exchange between her and Marcus. "We need to figure out how to handle the Eleanor situation. Once David's gone, she'll be dead weight." Marcus's jaw tightened. Stephanie reached for the page, but I pulled it back. "There are dozens more," I said calmly. "David documented everything, not to humiliate you, but to protect me. He knew you'd show your true colors once he was gone." Stephanie looked to her brother, but Marcus only muttered, "This could get ugly in court." "It won't get to court," Morrison interjected. "The trust is airtight." And with this documentation, he tapped the folder. Any judge would see clear evidence of intent. For the first time, Stephanie's confidence cracked. Her voice trembled. "So, what now? You just gloat. You ruin me." I met her gaze steadily. No, I don't need to ruin you. You're doing that yourself. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for boundaries. She blinked. Boundaries. Yes. From this point forward, all communication goes through Mr. Morrison. No more calls, no more lunches, no more sweet invitations to talk about money. If you want something, you speak to him. Otherwise, you leave me alone. Her mouth opened, then closed. For a woman so quick with words, she suddenly had none. Mr. Morrison slid a paper across the desk. I've prepared a no-contact agreement. It formalizes exactly that. Eleanor is under no obligation to interact with you directly. Stephanie snatched the document, scanning it furiously. This is absurd. You can't cut me out of my husband's family. You cut yourself out, I said quietly, the day you called me an extra expense. The room fell silent. Even Marcus had no clever retort. Mr. Morrison leaned back in his chair. I suggest you sign Stephanie. It will prevent further legal entanglement, and frankly, it's in your best interest. Her hand shook as she dropped the paper back on the desk. This isn't over. I rose, tucking the folder back into my purse. For me, it is. I have a new home, a new life, and thanks to David, I have everything I need to keep it safe. I turned toward the door, pausing only once. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it speaks in ledgers and letters in quiet proof no one can erase. That's the justice David left me. And with that I walked out, leaving Stephanie slumped in her chair, Marcus staring at the floor, and Mr. Morrison watching me with something that looked like respect. 2 mornings after the meeting in Mr. Morrison's office, a thick envelope arrived at my new apartment. The return address read, Whitmore and King Attorneys at Law. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to open it. Inside was a letter on heavy stationery filled with formal threats and legal jargon. Stephanie intended to contest David's will, claiming undue influence, claiming I had manipulated my son in his final months. She demanded an immediate freeze of all accounts until the matter was settled in probate court. For a moment, old panic clawed at me. I could hear her voice again. You're just his mother. I could see the smug tilt of her head the way she thought money made her invincible, but then I remembered David's letter. Don't confront her until you are safe. And I remembered Mr. Morrison's calm assurance. The trust is airtight. So instead of pacing, I called Morrison's office. He picked up on the second ring. Ah, Eleanor, he said, as if expecting me. I take it you received their letter? Yes, I admitted. It sounds serious. It's theater, he replied evenly. A scare tactic. Let me be clear. David established that trust 5 years ago. It's funded, documented, and separate from his estate. It cannot be contested by Stephanie or her attorneys. She may file motions, but they'll be dismissed as quickly as they arrive. I let out a shaky laugh. So she's just bluffing. Precisely. Trying to rattle you. Don't let her succeed. I hung up and sat back, relief washing over me. Stephanie's threats weren't ropes around my neck. They were smoke, nothing more. The following week, more letters came. Each thicker, each filled with more desperate language. One accused me of concealing assets. Another claimed I had undue influence over David's finances. The most outlandish one suggested David hadn't been of sound mind when he amended the will 3 months before his death. Each time Morrison responded on my behalf with the same calm precision. The claims are baseless. The trust is separate. Cease further harassment. By the third letter, I stopped feeling afraid. I started feeling sorry for her. One afternoon, while unpacking books in my new apartment, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Stephanie's voice, brittle and trembling, filled the room. You think you've won, Eleanor, but this isn't over. That money belongs to me. David was my husband. He owed me that. You can't hide behind lawyers forever. I deleted it without saving. For years I had lived in fear of her moods, her icy glances, her power over the house where I laid my head. But now her words had no teeth. They were echoes in an empty room. Morrison called me the next morning. Good news, he said. The probate judge dismissed her preliminary motion outright, cited lack of standing and the clear documentation of the trust. She can appeal, but it won't go anywhere. I exhaled slowly. So it's really over. It's as over as these things ever get, he said kindly. She may keep shouting, but the law is not on her side. I sat on my little balcony that night sipping tea, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. Justice wasn't always a thunderclap in a courtroom. Sometimes it was a quiet dismissal, a door closing gently but firmly on cruelty. Stephanie did try one last stunt. She showed up outside my apartment building 2 days later, her BMW idling at the curb. She stood on the sidewalk, sunglasses, covering her eyes, phone pressed to her ear. I watched from my window as she paced, gesturing angrily. A younger me might have gone down, tried to reason, tried to soothe. But not this Eleanor. I drew the curtains and let her rage at the air. An hour later, the car was gone. I realized something important that evening. Stephanie wasn't fighting for David's memory or even for justice. She was fighting for a lifestyle she thought she deserved. Designer dresses, spa weekends, the appearance of success. Without David's steady income and without access to the trust that lifestyle was slipping through her manicured fingers, and no amount of threats could change the fact that my son had chosen differently. Sitting at my kitchen table, I pulled out David's letter again. The ink had smudged slightly where my tears had fallen the first time I read it. You deserve so much better than the way she treated you. Take this money and build yourself a life where no one can make you feel unwanted ever again. I whispered into the quiet room, I will, David. I promise. The threats no longer frightened me. They reminded me that karma doesn't always arrive in flames. Sometimes it comes in paperwork and a judge's dismissal in the silence after a phone that no longer rings. Stephanie thought she could erase me, but my son had written me back into the story in ink too bold for her to blot out. The morning light poured through the sheer curtains of my little apartment, and for the first time in months, I didn't wake with a knot in my chest. I brewed coffee in my small French press, toasted a slice of bread, and sat on the balcony listening to birds chattering in the trees. It wasn't luxury, but it was mine. Every sip tasted like freedom. The stipend from David's trust had started landing in my account, a steady deposit reliable as sunrise. I logged into the bank app and stared at the numbers almost in disbelief. For decades, I had lived on careful budgeting, clipping coupons, stretching meals. Now my son's foresight gave me a cushion larger than anything I'd ever imagined. But here's the thing: I didn't want extravagance. I didn't crave designer dresses or flashy cars. What I wanted was security, stability, the knowledge that no one could toss me out with 24 hours notice ever again. So I made practical choices. I bought a new mattress, firm and comfortable, to replace the lumpy motel bed that had bruised my back. I treated myself to fresh sheets, soft cotton, and a pale blue that reminded me of spring skies. I stocked my pantry with real food, fresh fruit, good bread, tea that didn't come in motel packets. Each purchase wasn't about money. It was about dignity. One afternoon, I walked into a small second-hand shop near the library and found a sturdy oak table with 4 mismatched chairs. The owner, a woman my age with kind eyes, gave me a discount when she heard I was furnishing a new place. Starting fresh, she asked as she wrapped a lamp in newspaper. Yes, I said simply, and it struck me how powerful those words were. Starting fresh, at 67. When the table was delivered, I placed it near the window and set a vase of daisies in the center. For years, I'd eaten standing at kitchen counters, squeezed into corners of someone else's home. Now I had a table where I could sit, pray, write letters, or simply watch the world pass outside. I also began reconnecting with the community I'd quietly withdrawn from. At the library, I signed up for a weekly book club. At church, I volunteered to help with Sunday coffee service. The first time I poured someone else a cup, I realized how long it had been since I'd felt useful without being used. People welcomed me gently without prying questions. They knew I was a widow, that I had lost my son, but they didn't ask about Stephanie or the drama. Instead, they asked about my favorite books, my recipes, my stories. It felt like being seen again. In the evenings, I sometimes took long walks around the neighborhood. The streets were lined with modest homes, children riding bikes, neighbors waving from porches. More than once, I imagined David walking beside me, steady and quiet. I'd whisper, "You kept your word, son," even from beyond the grave. And in those moments, grief softened into gratitude. Stephanie's shadow still lingered, of course. Mr. Morrison forwarded me the occasional angry email her lawyer tried to file, each one dismissed almost as soon as it appeared. But I no longer flinched. Her desperation was no longer my burden. One night as I sat at my new oak table writing in a journal, I realized I wasn't writing about pain anymore. I was writing about possibility, what I wanted to cook, which books I wanted to read, maybe even a trip to Phoenix to see my sister. For the first time in a long time, my story wasn't about survival, it was about living. I framed David's letter and hung it on the wall above my desk. Not the whole thing, just the last line written in his careful hand. Take this money and build yourself a life where no one can make you feel unwanted ever again. Every morning I read those words before I head out the door. They aren't just instructions. They're a blessing. The first knock on my new apartment door came on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been arranging books on the little shelf I bought at the thrift store when I heard it. On the other side stood a woman holding a plate covered in foil. She looked to be in her 70s, her gray hair pinned neatly, her eyes sparkling with humor. "Welcome to the building," she said. "I'm Marjorie, apartment 2B. Thought you might like some banana bread." I blinked, startled. For so long, my interactions with women of her age had been tense, competitive, or laced with judgment. But Marjorie's smile was unguarded. "Thank you," I said, taking the warm plate. "I'm Eleanor." "Well, Eleanor, you just made your first friend here," she said cheerfully. That evening, I sliced the banana bread and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just the sweetness of the loaf. It was the sweetness of being seen not as a burden, but as a neighbor worth welcoming. A few days later, I joined the weekly book club at the library. The group was a mix of retirees, a few young mothers, and even a teenager who said reading helped her escape the noise of her household. We sat in a circle of mismatched chairs, discussing a novel about second chances. When it was my turn to speak, I hesitated. Then I said, "The main character reminded me that starting over doesn't have to mean forgetting the past. Sometimes it means carrying it differently." Several heads nodded. A woman across the circle whispered, "That's exactly what I needed to hear. For the first time in years, my words weren't dismissed. They mattered." At church, I began volunteering for Sunday coffee service. It was small work, brewing pots of coffee, arranging sugar packets, wiping tables. But the smiles I received filled me more than any inheritance could. One Sunday, a man named Harold, widowed like me, tapped his mug and said, "You pour coffee like you're pouring kindness." I laughed, but the compliment stayed with me. The more I stepped outside my apartment, the more I realized how many people were quietly carrying heavy stories. A single mother in the building struggling with late rent. An elderly veteran down the hall who had no family left. A young cashier at the grocery store who always looked exhausted, her smile forced. I didn't swoop in with money that wasn't what they needed. Instead, I listened. I offered a meal, a ride, a kind word. And with every small act, I felt my own wounds stitch themselves tighter. David's voice echoed in my memory. Build a life where no one can make you feel unwanted again. Helping others was part of that life. Not because I owed anyone, but because I chose to give from a place of fullness, not desperation. One Friday evening, Marjorie invited me to join her knitting circle. I don't knit, but I went anyway. 8 women sat around her living room yarn, spilling from baskets, laughter filling the air. They talked about everything, aches and pains, grandchildren recipes gone wrong. When I admitted I'd never learned to knit, Marjorie pressed a pair of needles into my hands. "You'll learn," she said, "and even if you don't, you'll still belong." Belong. The word landed softly but firmly in my heart. The loneliness that had haunted me after David's death began to fade. Not vanish, it never truly does, but soften. In its place grew something sturdier, connection. On my little balcony, I sometimes imagine David sitting across from me, watching me laugh with neighbors pour coffee at church, stumble through my first knitting project. I could almost hear him chuckle. That's my mom. And for once, I didn't feel the hollow ache of what was gone. I felt the strength of what remained. It struck me one evening as I wrote in my journal, Stephanie had thought banishing me from her house would erase me. She thought throwing me out would make me vanish into silence. But here I was not erased at all. Rerooted, growing. The will, the trust, the money, those were David's tools. But this circle of neighbors, this little community, this chance to belong again, that was my choice. The library's community room smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. Our book club had gathered again, but this time the discussion turned deeper. The novel we'd been reading centered on a widow rebuilding her life, and one woman sighed, "Fiction makes it seem so easy. Real life isn't like that." Silence followed. People shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. I felt the weight of my own truth pressing at my chest. For weeks I'd listened quietly, offering only small comments. But now I realized something hiding my story wasn't protecting me anymore. It was shrinking me. I cleared my throat. "You're right," I said softly. "Real life isn't easy. Sometimes it's brutal, but it can still lead to healing." 8 pairs of eyes turned toward me. "I lost my son recently." I continued, my voice trembling at first. He was my only child. After the funeral, my daughter-in-law asked me to leave the home we'd shared. I had nowhere to go. For a while I lived in a motel, thinking I'd been erased. Worthless. Gasps rippled through the circle. Someone reached for my hand. But I said steadier now. My son hadn't forgotten me. He left me the means to rebuild. More than money, he left me proof that I wasn't crazy, that the cruelty I endured was real, and that he loved me enough to make sure I'd never have to depend on anyone's charity again. Tears burned my eyes, but I pressed on. I'm telling you this because sometimes we think our story ends when someone betrays us, when family wounds us, when grief swallows us. But maybe that's not the end. Maybe it's the middle, and the next chapter is ours to write. The room was quiet, except for the muffled sound of someone sniffing. Marjorie, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand so firmly I thought she might never let go. "That's beautiful," whispered the teenager in the group. "My mom always says I'm too much trouble. Hearing you say this makes me think maybe I'm not." My heart clenched. In that moment, I knew why David had asked me to use the trust to build a life of my own, not just to survive, but to speak, to turn my silence into strength for someone else. Later that week, Marjorie invited me to share at her knitting circle. "Just tell them what you told us," she urged. So I did. I sat in a living room filled with women knitting scarves and socks, and I told them about lost betrayal and unexpected redemption. One woman, a widow named Clara, wiped her eyes. "My children barely call me. I thought it was just me, that maybe I'd failed as a mother. Hearing you, Eleanor, you make me believe I still matter." "You do matter," I said firmly. And I realized I wasn't just talking to Clara. I was talking to the part of myself that had once believed Stephanie's lies. The more I shared, the lighter I felt. Not because the pain vanished, it never fully does, but because speaking it aloud kept it from festering. My story wasn't just a wound, it was a lantern. One Sunday, Pastor James asked if I'd give a short testimony during service. My instinct was to refuse. Church had always been where I hid behind hymns and polite smiles. But something in me whispered, this is the next step. So I stood at the pulpit, my hands shaking, and told the congregation I thought my life ended the day I buried my son and was told I wasn't wanted. But grief isn't the end of the story. Betrayal isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of a new chapter, one where you learn your worth doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. When I stepped down, the applause wasn't loud. It was steady, gentle, healing. That afternoon, Marjorie said, "You should start a little group of your own, a space for people to tell their stories. You have a gift for listening and for making others believe they matter." I laughed at first. Me lead a group. But as the idea settled, it didn't feel impossible. It felt right. David's letter had asked me to build a life. Maybe this was how. That night, I sat at my oak table journal open and wrote, what if my story is not just survival? What if it's an invitation for others to find their voice too? I didn't know what form it would take yet. A circle at the library, a coffee hour at church. But I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer just a woman betrayed. I was a woman reborn. The idea began as a line in my journal. What if I made a space where people could simply share their stories? Marjorie encouraged me right away. "Don't overthink it," she said with her usual spark. "Just open your door, pour some coffee, and let people talk. That's all most of us really need to be heard." So one Thursday evening, I pushed my little oak table against the wall, set up a few folding chairs I'd borrowed from church, brewed a big pot of coffee, and placed a handwritten sign in the middle, her circle. At 6 o'clock, there was a knock. 3 people came through my door: Clara from the knitting group, Denise, a single mother from the building, and Emma, the teenager from book club clutching a notebook. We sat in a circle, mugs in hand, the silence heavy but expectant. I finally said, "This isn't a class and it's not therapy. It's just a space to tell your story if you want to. Listening counts too." Denise spoke first. She shared what it felt like raising 2 kids alone, invisible most of the time. Her voice broke when she whispered, "Sometimes I feel like I don't exist." Clara reached across and squeezed her hand. "You exist here," she said. Emma read a poem she'd written about being a burden in her own home. Her hands shook, but when she looked up, her eyes were shining. "I've never read this to anyone before," she admitted. "We didn't need polished speeches or perfect answers. Just listening made the room feel sacred." In the weeks that followed, more people joined Harold from church, a widower from down the hall, even a veteran who said his apartment walls felt like they were closing in. Each story was different, but the need was the same: to be seen, to be heard. And every time someone spoke, I felt something inside me knit back together. One evening as we washed coffee cups, Marjorie nudged me with her elbow. "You know what you've done, don't you?" "It's just a circle," I said, embarrassed. She shook her head. "It's more than that. You've turned your pain into a lantern. And now the rest of us gather around the light." Her words reminded me of David's letter, "Build a life where no one can make you feel unwanted again." Maybe this was exactly what he meant. It started with a simple invitation. Pastor James approached me one Sunday after service, a kind smile on his face. "Eleanor," he said, "we're hosting a community forum next month, an evening of stories about resilience. Would you be willing to share yours?" For a moment, my heart seized. Share my story out loud, in front of strangers. The old Eleanor would have declined politely, shrinking into the background. But the woman who'd created her circle knew this was the next step. "I'll do it," I said, surprising even myself. The night of the forum, I stood backstage, clutching David's letter in my hand. My palms were damp, my knees unsteady, but when I stepped out and saw the faces waiting, neighbors, church members, even a few people from our book club, I felt a calm settle over me. I began simply, "My name is Eleanor. A year ago, I thought my life had ended. I buried my only son, and the very next day, my daughter-in-law asked me to leave the house we had shared. I was 67, homeless, and convinced I was worthless." Gasps echoed through the room. I paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. But my son hadn't forgotten me. He left me more than money. He left me proof. Proof that I mattered, that the cruel words I'd heard weren't the truth. He documented everything, not to punish his wife, but to protect me. And because of that, I was able to start again. I lifted the letter. This is what he wrote: "Take this money and build yourself a life where no one can make you feel unwanted ever again." My voice broke, but I pressed on. I share this because betrayal isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's the turning point. Sometimes it's what forces you to discover that your worth doesn't depend on anyone's approval. The silence was absolute. Even the children in the back were still. When I finished, the applause rose slowly like a wave, not loud or frantic, but steady, warm, like the room itself was holding me up. People lined up afterward to thank me. A woman who said she was going through a divorce, a man who had lost his brother, a teenager who whispered, "I needed to hear that." It struck me then, my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever felt discarded, invisible, or unwanted. Later that night, back in my little apartment, I set David's letter on the table and whispered, "We did it, son. Your words didn't stop with me." I realized that evening that justice isn't always about courtrooms or inheritances. Sometimes justice is a voice that refuses to be silenced. Sometimes it's the courage to stand up, share the truth, and let someone else borrow your strength. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living and I was leading. I've come to realize that family betrayal cuts deeper than almost any wound. But even in that darkness, truth and justice can find their way through. David kept his promise. He protected his mother until the very end. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean excusing what was done. Forgiveness is freeing yourself from the chains of bitterness. I didn't forgive Stephanie to justify her actions. I forgave her so I could keep moving, so I wouldn't stay trapped in anger. That's what family betrayal stories remind us. Pain can tear the heart wide open, but healing has the power to stitch it back stronger. As George Eliot once wrote, "It is never too late to be what you might have been. At 67, I thought my life had ended. Now I know it was only just beginning." So let me turn to you, dear listener. Have you ever walked through betrayal in your own family? How did you find your way back to peace? Share your story in the comments below. You never know whose life your words might touch. And if you found hope in mine, please like, share, and subscribe. Because every time we tell the truth, every time we stand back up, we remind the world, betrayal is not the final chapter. Love is.